It's 97 degrees. I'm seeing faces I ain't seen in years. We're all praying for a breeze. There are people I'm enjoying and others I'm flat out avoiding. But we all agree this year's been pretty hard, and we love Emily behind the open bar. Wounded in similar ways, wounded in similar ways. It sounds like something that a hippie would say, but the truth is we're wounded in similar ways.
But yeah, so I'm here with Jefrey Siler, who's got a new album out. I've been listening to that and then some of your other stuff. So I'm excited to get into it because I really enjoyed it. How old are you? What
48.
48. Okay, so yeah, so I'm like about 10 years behind you, and the music scene. It was funny. You've seen this change over time. Like I've mentioned it as like a metaphor for some of my patients when they're talking about stuff at therapy, and I'm talking about like individuation and how when you're a teenager you relate to stuff or college. And people around a certain age are like, yeah, the music scene. Like if you weren't listening to Neutral Milk Hotel, you couldn't date somebody, and that's so stupid now. But like that was where it was because you had to be understood, or you had to know who the Mountain Goats were or something. And then you start to get a couple years younger than me. People start being like, what are you talking about? So it is wild. You've seen that stuff kind of roll and change. But I hadn't really found a ton of new music that I was interested in. So I get 8 million requests from people, and when your agent had sent me your stuff, I'd clicked on it and just wasn't really expecting a ton, because I'm kind of hard to please music wise. Never really thought would sit down, but I enjoyed that album, man. I've been like listening to it, beyond just what I would need to do an interview. So, and then getting into some of the older stuff where I could find it. So it's good stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history? Because it looks like you've been doing it longer than that one.
Yeah, I'm originally from North Carolina, and when I graduated in '94, I immediately moved to Los Angeles. I was a massive Jane's Addiction fan, and so then I didn't really understand how, like in the '90s, it was maybe of a different scene because it was like there was very strict lines drawn. It felt like, you were grunge. You wanted to make sure you weren't a poser. And those are the kind of things that can really impede your creative growth. It's like really a fog when you're trying to find your voice. And so I did my first album. I moved back from LA to Atlanta, and I started recording in earnest. And then just kind of found my voice along the way. I mean, when you read any of your early song lyrics, it's like reading your teenage poetry, it's just, it's bad. It's full of pretensions. You can see where you're hiding from what you're actually wanting to say. And
does it help you find what you were trying to say though, when you jump back into that stuff?
Big time. I remember Mike Mills from REM. He said he always leaves like 10 instruments lying around and throughout his house. So he goes, I pick it up, 10 times a week, and I get the bad stuff out of the way so that I can begin to write the good stuff, so I can weed it out. And that's kind of how I've learned to have a much more forgiving filter, where you kind of understand who's in. I refer to it as who's invited to the writing process and when. And the editor is kind of like that uptight guy at the dinner party where you like him there, and 3 wines into the evening, he's good conversation, but he only comes for dessert. And so when you're in that that open place where you're wanting to write and you're figuring out what you're trying to say, the editor's not invited. And so it's just kind of a less judgmental, vibe.
And you was there anything in particular when you're going through the younger stuff that you kind of saw, I was trying to say that in a messianic or an immature or a not quite, full of the vocabulary of maturity way, but this is what that was. That actually is a cool idea. Do you find those in your younger stuff?
Yes, and there was this one song, and I actually musically like it. It was called "Sharpened Your Essence," and it was, I mean, I was just knee deep, neck deep, probably in Echo and the Bunnymen fascination at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
with the English accent and that great hair and permanent sunglasses, you can you can pull that off. But when you're a 17-year-old with a thick North Carolinian accent. And so you see that you were just trying to say something a lot more I don't know, there's only so many subjects you can tap into, but I was trying, and I think that being obnoxious in those years helps, because you're like, I've got to say something, but the floweriness of early writings gets diluted to actually what you can sit with and say.
Yeah, there's an artist that I like that does this comic called Deadly Class that Image Comics puts out, that's kind of like indie comic or whatever, and the premise of it is kind of making the way high school feels like an actual worldview or actual like thing. And so it's like this school for assassins where the kids have to learn how to be assassins, but a lot of them die, and it's super intense. So if you pick the wrong click, it could kill you. And there's a lot of this kind of, it's really good, but there's this pseudo serious likeness that you feel as a teenager that is sort of made into a world. And he said that if he didn't save his journals from being a teenager, he never could have written it, because there was this just kind of like myopic, unquestioning intensity that you had to go back and find, or else you could never remember,
Yeah.
And I think there is something to that. I found some journals from college and like, woo Lord.
Yeah. I was listening to, like, we're renovating an old home from 1908, just north of Austin. And so I've just had this huge lawn. And so I have all the time in the world to just listen to podcasts. And I was listening to a Brene Brown interview where she calls it she calls her high school years the cafeteria. It's like the cafeteria period where you don't know where you can sit in the cafeteria, and there's tables that you want to sit at, and there's tables that that you're only going to be allowed to sit at. And that's when I heard that, I know exactly that feeling. I can picture the cafeteria, and I can even remember specifically sitting at the table and this girl, Danielle Hahn, going, "Since when are you sitting at the popular table?" And I just felt like a balloon turn into a raisin right there. I was like, but that same precariousness you need in songwriting, because you go, can I pull this off?
Yeah, I think I survived just by kind of playing dumb. Like, people like this table. What's so good about this table? You can have it.
I think people thought I was playing dumb, and I was like, no, I'm trying to play as hard as I can.
Well, so you had said that you were in LA to do music, or in LA to do what when you head down there?
When I would watch videos. Yeah, when I was watch videos, I didn't understand the difference between a different scene. Like, I was seeing bands all the time when I would go down to Atlanta, and it was like punk and ska and stuff like that. And I kind of always thought that whatever my experience was, it was second tier to true artist statements. And so when I saw Los Angeles, I mean, I was into the Chili Peppers and Mother's Milk and Uplift Mofo, and I kind of naively snubbed my nose when Blood Sugar came out, because they got so popular, and I was just silly. But I always thought that Los Angeles was this elevated place where, man, it's so pure, and of course you have no idea how cheesy and like that all cities can be. But when I came to LA, I just wanted to experience what that was. And yeah, I mean, that's what that. Do you know the song on the album, History Lesson Part 3?
Yeah.
That second verse is about that. It's like, by the time I got to California, I had a self-help section on my bookshelf between the mirrors.
Yeah,
But
some
upon
of it
inspect,
was pieces of autobiography I could kind of put together, and others were parts of autobiography. I was like, you could tell it was something personal, but wasn't quite sure what it was.
yeah, yeah, and even the name of that song was named after a Minutemen song because they've got a song called History Lesson Part Two. So
Mm.
it was an ode to the California that I learned was, beneath the surface and the sheen that I loved and still
Well, it
love.
seems like people who were, I mean, they're still popular cities. It just seems like the relationship has changed, but seems like a lot of 90s kind of aspiring artists, filmmakers, musicians, actors, whatever, saw either New York or LA as the place that was the source, that if you weren't there, you were getting a watered down version. What is it
Big
about
time.
people of your generation? Why LA and not New York? What was that appealing to, that LA was yours and New York was one that, I think a lot of times other types of personalities or other kinds of art were called to that.
Yeah, well, it's funny because my little brother went to New York. He's 6 years my junior, but when he graduated, he went to New York, but he went to college. But I always thought that New York was just a steeper hill than Los Angeles. I thought Los Angeles was steep, but I just thought New York would eat me alive. And then when Matthew did it, I was like, I so wish I had had that chapter. But then, my wife and I did that chapter 7 years
Mm-hmm.
and loved it. But there's a certain, there's a certain regret of not having experienced it at a certain time. But I mean, you're going to have that with anything. So you can only
Yeah.
be at one place at one time. But I think that LA held out this, I mean, I had the Raymond Pettibone books of art. I was into the lore of what Redondo Beach was and those books of poetry and essays by Henry Rollins, and then all the tangential, is that how is it? Tangential?
Tangential.
Anyway,
Yeah.
tangential.
Yeah.
All those scenes that were attached, so there's a band called Thelonious Monster.
Mm.
He had a therapy talk show about rehab and recovery with Dr. Drew. His name's Bob Forrest. And I mean, he was Flea's best friend, and John Frusciante was in his band before, and that's how the Chili Peppers stole him. But I mean, he was introducing, the Chili Peppers to Peter Hook from New Order. So I read everything I could being in North Carolina and just living through Spin Magazine and all the odds.
Well, and then you start making the music that, or the scene. How do you break free of the scene? Is that just kind of when college rock falls apart, or the segregation between grunge and punk and, classic rock and everything in the 90s? Where do you start? How do you, chart that progression of time?
Well, it's funny because at my age, I've gone with Spotify to start making playlists of what I was listening to at that time, like age specific playlist. And it's funny, it came from an idea. There was an interview with Joy Williams, and she mentioned in the Paris Review where she mentions James Salter, the author, used to teach a course in authors, what they wrote at the age of the class. And I thought, I want to understand what albums I was listening to and why. And then it tapped into some of the odder stuff that I make that I thought, oh, that doesn't suit a record, but it should, because I'm just I'm not that I have listeners, but that I'm giving the potential listener only, 2/3 of the photo of my face or my person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to understand how much, I mean, when that album Ween, The Pod, when it came out, I
Mm-hmm.
remember buying it. And I mean, they only had that one in the first one. And I ate that up. I loved it. I mean, this was before Push the Little Daisies and all that. And, the early They Might Be Giants, that like those first two albums, but that was so left of center. Probably how Ben
Yeah.
Folds felt when
There's
he
really
came
nothing
out,
like it.
because exactly. And I kind of think through therapy, I think that there's these stages for me where you you start to understand certain things, like someone's shedding a light, and then 10 years later you start to accept it.
So you felt like the process of therapy was helpful to you, realizing that you could just kind of blow everything up, and if somebody judged that, then that was what's going to happen. But that the people who you were being called to when you were younger, that you or saw something and they were just kind of blowing something up. It wasn't like they were iterating on something else that was already out there. And correct me where I'm
Yeah. No. It's actually perfect. There was a Rollins band song called "I'm a Liar," and he goes, "I'll say things you already know, so you'll say, 'Oh, he so gets me.'" And I think that's the process when you're doing like the object writing, like journaling and stuff like that. You're trying to get to the core of what your issue is, because like my big issue was belonging and not feeling like I belonged anywhere, or half someplace and the other half someplace else. And I think that
which
when
makes
you
it hard to
start
step out of a scene, I would imagine,
Exactly. And so you constantly you're reading the rules, you're understanding them so that you can try and fit in. And then when you start to get a modicum of acceptance, you start to be able to read the room objectively, and you go, "Oh, I don't want to be in this room." And so it's interesting. It's just, I even feel like I'm still there now. Like it's like the concrete hasn't set yet.
What was helpful
I think it
about
keeps you young.
Oh yeah. I think people that make a certain kind of art tend to age slower, especially comedians. You see that kind of, it's like you can't even predict their age. Their perspective has to be so relevant because, and I think it's an active listening to yourself and the world to be like, what am I saying? How do I say it? I have to say it different tomorrow. They're kind of aware of that dialectic, that even though I'm saying the same thing, I can't release the same album. So it's got to, David Bowie's got to move on to the next thing, in a way that does keep you relevant and young, almost.
Yeah, I'm working on a book about how songwriting works and just like activities. And so the first exercise that I do is I say, write down 7 things that have happened to you in the last 4 weeks, because I think there's a separation between what songwriters, at least for me, think songs should be, like what is worthy of a song and what subjects aren't. And then when you look at like the 7 things that have happened to you in the last few weeks, then you can kind of get into the minutia. And those are little windows into subjects that are rooted in deeper feelings, like getting cut off in traffic twice, might, trickle down into feeling invisible, and, all those little things. But I'm kind of very open about where it can lead. I think Vic Chestnut, the songwriter Vic Chestnut, really opened that attic door to me, because he would just write about any and everything. And I was like, and he's from Georgia. And so it's a strange way that someone from your locale doing it was, it, in a weird way, it gives you permission. I don't think that artists should wait for permission, but I think that a lot of artists do. And, seeing Vic, and I got to sit with him on his porch for a couple of hours. And you hear Jeff Mangum go, I moved to Athens to find God, and instead I found Vic Chestnut.
Yeah, Elephant Six Collective. I mean, that really was something that kind of passively changed music for about a decade in the way it was made, and just even the network. I mean, it was kind of a reference point when I was in school, because you had, I don't know. I mean, you're talking about grunge. You're a little bit older than me. It may be interesting before we get into like your style and your genre to just kind of hop through some of the kind of peaks and swells of the culture of music, especially since some of the people are younger and they may not even be aware of those movements. But I mean, I remembered kind of Gen Xy people had to pick between a couple scenes. Like there were less scenes for them than there were for me. It was kind of like Cobain was someone you couldn't ignore, and grunge was kind of going out. It was like what everybody's older brother listened to. I mean, what was your experience with that, the post punk and all that stuff?
I think the first or the second band I ever saw was Mudhoney on the Every Good Boy Deserves Fudge tour. And you're almost in disbelief because when you're in North Carolina, I finally was able to get cable when I was like 15. I can remember we would watch 120 Minutes, and Smells Like Teen Spirit was debuted on that at midnight. And, you know, I didn't know Bleach, and I heard that song, and I always VHS'd all of 120 Minutes. And I remember waking my little brother up the next day before school to play him that song. And we were both like, it was unheard of how monumental. I mean, you just felt like it ushered in that one riff. It's the power of just one idea. And it was, I think that when I'm hanging out, like a friend of mine, Honey, in Australia, she is 17, and her mom has been one of our best friends. And the context of hearing a song by like Stone Temple Pilots, it just disgusts me. Like, it just makes my stomach turn. But when you were in that age, you saw the rollout of all these bands. Like Nirvana came out, but Pearl Jam was right there. But it seemed like Stone Temple Pilots was one of those bands that the labels scurried to get their version of an Alice in Chains meets Nirvana. And when they came out, and Scott, and I was, part of the problem where I just saw people as posers, but I still stand by, like, Scott Weiland, just unacceptable. And but like, I remember when Alice in Chains, I mean, you would watch Headbangers Ball on Saturday night and Sunday night, 120 Minutes. And I remember when Wood, that very first Alice in Chains song, came out. So that was a really, really cool time, because I mean, I saw Radiohead play a Tower Records the night before the Bends came out. And there was like 60 people there. So I still think that this stuff, like, I was talking to a girl who was 18. I feel like I'm talking about teenage girls too much, but I was talking to she and her mom, and I go, I don't understand what the K-pop stuff is, and make me a playlist. And so I just dug into it, because I don't feel that I feel that the 90s tapped into something as unique as what K-pop is tapping into, as unique as, Eamon Dunes. I'm really open to just accepting that time moves on, and I love that it has. I would hate that if grunge just stayed what it was, and it just stayed as the king of the hill. I'm very happy that things move on.
Well, what's interesting to me, I mean, we talk kind of about like social anthropology a lot on the podcast, and is it art, matter, and culture, or whatever. And one of the things is like, like, had Cobain lived, he probably would have just continued to change. I mean, Radiohead's still around. It doesn't sound anything like the Radiohead from the 90s,
Yep.
He probably would have gotten into other genres, and, he was a talented person. But I think one of the reasons why that suicide is held up as so relevant to like a generation too is it's like, boomers never really gave up any financial control still. I mean, they just statistically, they've got 80% of the country's wealth, but usually youth culture takes over. And with Gen X, it kind of skipped them, because they had these weird anomalies where the internet, everything they thought was cool was like gone by the time they graduated in this way that was kind of sad. It was like, they were like, yeah, publishing, magazines, zines, rock music, New York. And all these snot-nosed kids are using iPhones, and they don't know how to open a PDF. And so it was like, no one, we have this crazy nostalgia where the boomers are still, financially in charge. Millennials aren't doing too hot, financially, but they got the breweries with the Edison Classic light bulbs on strings, and the stomp, clap, inspirational ballad music, and like whatever they got, and they get to be nostalgic for all the stuff they grew up with. But no one's going back and like rebooting Daria, no one's like going back to Gen X-y things. And so it did kind of feel, I think, like Cobain was like their guy, that when it felt like it ended this era. He was like the Kennedy of, I don't know if that makes sense, but So
Yeah.
you've got, so that happens, and then what do you have next? College rock, Modest Mouse, guitar rock kind of comes back and kind of goes away. I mean, how do you see those next couple eras of music?
Well, it's funny. I saw, I think, Modest Mouse on their first time they came to Atlanta on the Lonesome Crowded West. I actually got dinner with Isaac just because I was like doing a brief interview, and then we just chatted and hung out. When
You nice
Modest
guy?
Mouse came out, yeah, very nice. Yeah, I remember he was like, "I'm living in a like a empty office. I sleep there when I'm not on tour," and I was like, "Interesting." I was like,
Yeah.
but I was soaking it up, but I was trying
Well, he
to
seemed like a
write a
very nice and
magazine.
very sad person. Real interesting guy.
Yeah, but I mean, I remember when they came out, they were really branded as, really ripping the Pixies off. And but I mean, everyone's harsh on everyone. I'm not subscribing to that, but I remember articles saying that, but they were great live. And ironically, of all the bands I've ever seen, I have seen Modest Mouse more than any band. And I like Modest Mouse a lot, but I have just been given more free tickets to see I don't know why.
Wow.
But yeah, that was good. I mean, I was at the Jeff Mangum and Neutral Milk lived in Athens, and
Okay.
there was and so I went to the record release show in at the 40 Watt in their hometown for In the Airplane.
Mhm.
And because there was a record store next to it, I don't know if it still's there, but it's called Low Yo Yo. But I think that different like sonic colors were coming to the light, like with when Neutral Milk Hotel came out within the Airplane over the sea. I was saying how like I got to go to their record release show, and you didn't know kind of what galaxy that was coming from. And in reality, it was, maybe a crossroads of Flaming Lips and Vic Chestnut and all those different things. And so that was interesting. I think that Vic Chestnut unlocked a lot for me because he just got into the minutia. You could kind of vaguely sew together all the little things, and he would use words like assuage, and and I, read every interview and talked to him on his porch for a couple hours about songwriting one day, which is one of my most treasured memories. But then that, all you're just piecing together how you're starting to view songs. And so that was, I can see all that lineage of uh, the song era, the era specific songs that were clicking with me. So that then I was like, oh. And so then when you hear things like Spoon's meticulousness in their recording, and then you hear like what we were talking about with Big Thief, their looseness, but they're still like she's a Kerrville, long time attendee. Like I don't know Adrian,
Could you
but
tell us
she's
about
friends of
Crevell for
friends.
people not familiar or not in the industry?
Yeah, so it's like a songwriting retreat in Texas, and there's ones in Colorado, and you're just working with other songwriters. Yeah, not necessarily just co-writing, but playing songs in different stages of completion, and you're getting feedback. And when I went to one of those, it was important for me because you're there in a community of people who largely are performing just with the accompaniment of an acoustic guitar, and so there's not a lot of places to hide. And so I like that because I would have like say written down versions of a song, and I go, I'm not sure about this lyric, I might change it later, and they would go, why? Like change it now, like decide on what you're going to say. And I thought, oh, that can be done. And that kind of discipline I responded to because I like the discipline of the folk world, but I'm just as tied to the art rock world of like Deerhoof, and one of my favorite bands is the Rocketeens. And so all those things were the soil that I came from.
I think that's why I loved that album so much and I wasn't expecting a ton, was that fusion of kind of the folk stuff, the folk influence, but art rock is kind of where I always was as like an indie rock kid in college. And when that started to go a different direction and everything was just kind of stomp, clap, tambourine, anthem, I kind of checked out.
Yes.
Yeah. And when I was listening to you, it's like, this is the looseness of Dylan Planet Waves. There, people in the studio are having fun. There's not too much of a plan, like I'm not listening to Cake where everything is just so clean, like so smooth off. But then also there's this texture, like, I heard it on that last Big Thief album where I was just like, man, you're really making me listen to specific sounds. This is like Wilco, A Ghost Is Born, where you're not just shredding on a rock song, you're really playing with the texture of stuff. And y'all do that really well. Like your album is great. How much are you writing with the people that you're recording with, or how much are they coming in, and what's the process of getting from the songwriting camp in Curvel to getting that album out in the form that it's out in?
The way that I did this one is that I pretty much had all the structure in place. And then we went to Sean, the drummer's apartment in Brooklyn, and he had a full drum kit up, and Brian Betancourt and Adam Brisbane, and we were just sitting in that room, and we went through it, did the songs like twice. I kind of had loose chord charts for them to follow. I recorded it, and then we waited like 2 weeks, and all I did was just pour over those recordings. And then we went in an apartment in Brooklyn and just, recorded all those versions. I think we did 7 songs in the first session, like a 3-hour practice, and then 6 more. And then we recorded 13 for this album, and we didn't use 3. And so I kind of feel like my part's done when I have the structure and the words done. And then it's like, I don't want to keep a tight rein. I mean, when you're playing, the way that I wanted to make this record is I just went to as many shows in Brooklyn and New York as I could, and I wanted to watch the locals play. I saw, Buck from Big Thief, he play a house show, and I'm just watching the players and just soaking it in, and then you go, okay, cool. I just want to be in a room and I've done my part. And then Brian plays with Devendra now. All these, Sean, I think he's played with Kevin Morby and so forth. So then you just let them do their colors, and then you're just kind of moving the canvas so that they can paint on it here, there, up like that. And so then when you come away with it, you go, okay, cool. And then, the Linnea from Habibi, she's a good friend. And man, that was probably some of the most fun, is like after we had done a lot of the backing tracks, just Linnea coming over to my wife and I's house and us just having fun with the background vocals, because we're all Shangri-La fans and Francois Harding. So just having that, French girl background feel. And, my wife was like, listen to Beauty School Dropout, for a song like Jean-Francois, so that it's not just one dimensional. It's got sonic depth of field and emotional depth of field, because you can't just be all. The impediment for me with goth was that it just seemed all dark, and for me to believe the dark, I need to see some of the light, so that you see how dark is dark.
Yeah, it's not the contrast
that way. Yeah.
Well, I think that's like that. The novice, the like early novice songwriter, like when you're like 14 and you write your first song, it's always going to be like, there's no contrast, there's no story, there's no loss. It's just, you're like, oh, I better get some serious images. And it's all like, I smoke cigarettes in the graveyard in the rain. Dad. And you got to start off, like looking at the beauty of the oleander and then meditating on its poison before you smoke the cigarette in the graveyard in the rain.
I love that. I was thinking when we had been emailing back and forth to schedule, you just think about therapy. And when I was in Brooklyn before we moved down to Austin, we were at this Thai place called Ugly Baby in Brooklyn. And so we were there with some friends and we were waiting on our table. And then we sit down and literally at an adjacent table is Lee Ronaldo from Sonic Youth. And I was like, because, they were I remember when Dirty came out. And so they get up to leave and I didn't want to bother them. But I walked out as they were waiting for their Uber. And I said, "Hey, Lee, my name's Jeffrey." And he goes, "Oh, hey, Jeff." And nicest guy, just the best experience. And I said, "Hey, I just wanted to tell you when I was like 16, I was like chronically depressed. And my parents made me go to see a therapist. And so the therapist was going, 'Oh, you really into music?' And I go, 'Yeah, I'm trying to get into this show, but it's sold out. It's this band Sonic Youth.' And he goes, 'Oh, do you know who Lee Ronaldo is?' And I go, 'Yeah, of course.' And he goes, 'He's my best friend.'" So
Wow.
I couldn't get it. I couldn't get into the show anyway because I think it was like 21 and older. But the next week he came back with a note that said, "Hang in there, Jeff. Sonic Life, Lee." And I said,
wow.
that gave me it gave me chills just now because it was just like you saw these people as like everything outside of North Carolina just seemed like so far away, and to see something. And I was not like the person to have idol worship of these guys, but they were unlocking and meant so much. They were building a bridge to sanity for me. And I was like, that Lee Ronaldo would take that time. So he was like, I go, "I didn't want to bother you during dinner, but I just want to," and he's like, "I am so glad you came up." And he gave me a hug and his wife gave me a hug. It was just really touching.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's neat the connections that you're able to, that you have through the music that you do. Would you say, on your album, would you say your style is kind of confessional or conversational, or because there's kind of the two things that jump out to me are that one, there's places where there's not like some big point that the singer songwriter is trying to meditate on, incredibly poetically. There's just kind of a subtle conversation and reflection about like, isn't it kind of wild that works this way? And then the moment moves on, like you're talking to the audience at a bar, and then there's also like a fixation on things that wouldn't normally be in a song, waiting in a line at a wedding and counting your drink tickets. I think the last time I heard drink tickets in a song, it was like on the Alopecia album by like Why, and which is, he kind of does the same thing, Is that something that you're aware of, or is that wrong? I don't know.
No, it's definitely, I mean, it's like therapy, like when you watch Therapist on TV, they're explaining what your problem is. But with all the therapists that I've had, and I think it's like 3 or 4, I've always been underwhelmed by how much they make me reach the conclusion. And it's my understanding that that's the healthy way because they're not always going to be around. And I think I've taken that to songwriting where I'm like, this is my experience, and the specificity of the setting. Like I remember Tom Waits saying, you should always know what the weather is like in a song. And I think that you really want to let people know where the furniture is so that then they get a lay of the land and then they can reach their own conclusions because, however people are in a different seat than me. And so I'm trying to go, well, this is the view from the back seat, but you might be seeing the same landscape, but it's different for you. And
you're talking on the screen, but not on my audio. So I want to make sure I'm not cutting you off due to the delay.
No.
Yeah.
No.
There's a little bit of a delay, so I'm trying to figure out what's going on some of the time. But and I think that's like one of the reasons why writing a song in your 20s is different than writing a song in your 40s. It's like you kind of feel like you'll have something figured out, or there'll be some sort of ultimate truth at the top of the hill. By 35-ish, you're like, yeah, okay, I'm at the top of the hill. There's a couple ways down this thing, but I see where it goes. Like this is kind of, the story feels less important in a way, but then that is ultimately, I guess, what makes the story important. There's like a
Yep.
therapist that worked with all these famous LA actors that or like all the people that went on to be famous in the 90s and the 2000s. He's like a real old kind of Jungian guy. And he had said in an interview, I think with Mark Maron, about how like he would just tell them to bring the shadow in the room. They were trying not to be insecure. They were trying to not look at the limitations of their performance, and that made the performance flat. So he was just like, go in there and be terrified in the interview. And that's that's it. And they're like, no, but it's a confident police sergeant. And he's like, yeah, that's boring. You need to be confident as a police sergeant because you're afraid. And that them taking the counterpoint to their performance made the performance work. And you kind of will do that in the songwriting a little bit, like that, the stuff that feels like a trope or silly, also being true. I mean, that wounded in similar ways where you say like, well, it's almost like sounds like something a hippie would say. But it's also the name and the chorus of the song, but you're kind of like being your own, writing your own, YouTube review there and then responding to it in the thing in a way that becomes the song. Like that's clever. That's, I don't know. I mean, what's your thought process there?
In those songwriting retreats, everyone would say, cut that hippie line out. And I was like, no, that would be the exact line that Vic Chestnut would keep in. And even if Vic wouldn't, I was like, that's right for me. I think that's the contrast, because that was and just as a footnote, that was a specific line. Like when we were in Imago couples therapy, that she said, Mother Nature has a way of matching us with people who are wounded in similar ways. And I was like, it's hard for me not to grab a pen, but then I would have been kicked out of it. But yeah, I think that, I want people to feel like I'm being conversational and honest with them, because I feel like now I understand how much a gift someone's full attention is to give to you. And so if you're asking them, please give me your undivided attention, then I want it to be rewarding, and I want them to go away going, I know what that, I feel like I've got a feeling. So I don't know, is that what you were saying? Or
yeah, they're pretty open-ended questions. I don't know. Another question I got to ask. I'm always trying to like clean these podcasts up and get them the file ready, and then it'll be 2 a.m. I got to go to sleep, and then I get up at 6 and I'm taking the kids to school and be listening to the file in the car. So I didn't realize my daughter was like listening to the podcast, but now she started to like ask for whatever, and she's 6, she doesn't know what is going on. But so she was this morning. She was like, I want to listen to the podcast, and I was like, no, we can listen to your music. We don't have to do that. And she asked who the next person was, and I said I was seeing somebody who was it wasn't just a musician; they were a singer, a songwriter, and a musician, like Taylor Swift, because that was the comparison that she understood.
Yeah.
And I asked if she had a question, and she said, yeah, if you want to just write songs and sing them to people, how do you get money? So I said I would ask that question of you.
Yeah.
And which it was also going to be one of my questions, because we talk about the history of the industry artistically. Well, a ton of the industry financially is totally different. I mean, the streaming service thing has kind of made everybody be permanently on tour if they want to make money. Eventbrite is your option. The idea of, I mean, there's still some hipster record store holdouts, but if you are going to try and pursue it professionally, the landscape is different. I mean, can you say anything about that, or how you navigate that?
Yeah, it's obviously not, there's no science or recipe or formula, but it makes me think of that thing that I read that Kim Gordon said, where she said, I've been amazed in my whole career as a musician how much money people will pay to watch someone on stage who believes in themselves. And I think that also Paul Westerberg said, if you aim for their wallet, you'll miss their heart by a mile. So I think that all those, and you're talking about two of the best musicians and songwriters in the past 40 years. So I think that you just have to accept that if you're going to be completely yourself, that audience might have a limit because maybe you're a niche artist. I mean, Daniel Johnson, when he was around, he certainly wasn't for everyone, but
Yeah.
when when he spoke to people, he spoke so acutely. And so I think that your idea of money is also needs to be tied to realistic expectations, because if you are down to only be honest, then you are going to find the right people, and every dollar that they spend is going to feel like $1,000,000, because they will have accepted you for you. And so money becomes a very nice thing in that setting. I mean, when you see people support Dave Bazan when he needs to buy a van, then you go, that is his tribe going, that's their way of saying thank you. So I'm very interested in money in that way, because if I can create art because of that, I mean, it's like I got paid for working at a pizzeria, because I worked hard. And if I work hard at being honest and being vulnerable, then if that's rewarded commiserately by the right people, then I'm all for it. And it just, that comes with time,
Well, and I think the cultural space that music fills, it's coming back as one of the only outlets for authentic, not celebrity, but like authentic public persona. YouTube and everything was kind of conceived of as, well, everybody will have a voice, and it won't. What is it that Andy Warhol had said, that everybody in the future will have their 15 minutes of fame. There won't be celebrity. As these cameras shrink and all that. But then it kind of turned into the people who are big, who make money. They can't have a personality, I'm too old for it, but it's like Mr. Beast or one of these people that is one of the younger, Gen Z influencer or something, said something about how, like, I can never say anything about myself or anything. Like, I have to talk, like, I want to have nothing. I don't even want to know who I am, was essentially what he said, in order to be a millionaire at, 20. And it's like, oh, that's, those algorithms have ripped all of that out of it. And, I think politics used to be something that people kind of saw. I mean, it's arguably largely been fake in my lifetime, but I mean, no one even is sort of pretending that right left is not just a performance. It looks weirder and faker than it ever has. And I think singer-songwriter, musician, I mean, there's kind of a rap feud going on right now. It seems like one of the only places where you can see a real authentic person doing a thing in any kind of part of our culture now. I don't know if you feel that or in dialogue with that, but it does seem like a trend.
Yeah. And I think that it was gobsmacking that when Kendrick wrote that verse just about to Drake's son, I was like, whoa. Because that is so it made me feel strongly, it made me feel strongly that is such a stance. And it's like Jeff Koons, it's like art. It's like going, whoa, that is hard. And so while the right and the wrong of it, certainly is debatable, I thought in that way, Kendrick was going, I don't care to be on the cover of the magazines. He goes, I'm not trying to be everything to everyone. So it really is interesting how the more you lean into yourself, it's also a risky thing, because you can become self-indulgent, lose objectivity. But I think that you do tread the line of, flirting with narcissism, because you're trying to really understand where you're coming from. And that, so, it's a balance, and it's a balance that, it's like you can tread a tightrope when you're young and thin, but then when you get older and you've got weight and you don't have as good a balance and you're on a tightrope, it's a different occupation.
Well, it's that kind of role of poetry and culture where it's like you can never quite get rid of it. It's almost always on its way out because it's always changing. But there's something about the archetype of the authentic poet speaking truth to power, or the other poet, or channeling the culture. That singer-songwriter as a tradition is pretty close to that. In the same way hip hop maybe is.
And you're creating your own radio station where people go, well, I'm not always tuning into 88.5, but I feel like 88.5 right now. And that's each of our, as songwriters, that's our radio station. Like, I mean, not always 88.5, but just where you go, I'm coming to this guy or girl, or, I'm coming to this songwriter for that reason. And that is incumbent upon every songwriter to have that definite reason. It's not definite genre, but you go, I come to this person for this.
Well, and you've come over and over again to the idea of asking for permission, that you're not even aware of, where you're asking for permission to do something that you can just do, and that you're better off if you just do it, and that you kind of confronted that with your looking at your older songs and looking at the lyrics at the songwriting camp and in therapy. You mentioned it. And it's a big question, but do you know what it is that you're wanting to say? Do you know what it is that you're trying to have permission to do, as a project? What is the nature of your art, or, kind of your, not that it has to be a message, but what you're getting at in a way that someone else is getting at a different thing.
I think it's belonging. I think that it's you want to be well read, so you want to find other people who are well read. So you want to put it out that you want to put it out there that I want to have a beer or coffee with people who are well read. I want to be in that company. But then you go, well, am I being pretentious when I throw out that magnet of being well read? And so it's constantly like you
get that I have many leather-bound books vibe that, a lot of YouTube awesome people type.
I guess moleskins are good enough for you.
Yeah.
Whereas it's like today's a perfect example. That's why it was a pleasure. Like, it's not lost time when we lost those few minutes recording, because it was like, you're exactly like, I would insist that we go to dinner if I came through Birmingham.
Yeah.
And so that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to build your community of people who make you feel like you belong. And I think that you can be insecure because you can, the more honest and vulnerable you be, the brighter your light shines. Like that it's so,
and it's a threat, it's corny, in some ways. People hear something that they want to call, well, I think that vulnerability and authenticity is what other people are going to attack as pretentious, and as an artist, you're always vulnerable and insecure that is pretension, that it isn't really real, that it's somehow a performance of the self and not the real self. And so,
is this actually how I feel?
Yeah. And so you have to get over that fear of you're going to get that message. There's somebody in the room that's going to say, who are you to say that? Do you have a right to say that? You're not really saying that. You got this from somewhere else. It isn't yours. I mean, that's just going to be the voice of the critic at some point, and you have to have some kind of greater principle of faith or self that takes you through that before you can really get it out. I think I work with a lot of artists in different professions, and even, business can be an art in a certain way. Sometimes, people authentic, I just work in that process of self and development. And that's kind of the pattern I see over and over again, is that people kind of weigh the pros and cons. And when they get to a place where they're like, yeah, of course they're going to say that, and I don't care. And that's when the thing hits, and all of a sudden lightning strikes, and you've got the next thing. Like,
yeah. And it's a weird sentiment, but it's like, you're doing something right when you've got haters, because you are provoking a reaction. And I think that as long as you're not doing it to get a reaction, then the reaction's okay. But if you're doing it to get a reaction, maybe it's because you are reacting. And if you're reacting and you're making sense of why you reacted, that's an idea. But if you're saying something, I mean, not that reacting isn't just as authentic, because I mean, we're all reacting to, one thing or another, but it's just interesting. The pursuit of how we go about, why would you put yourself through all this art? Like the amount of fights, my wife and I've had about money spent on creating art, and the amount of shows that I've played that no one came to, and the amount of hours that I spend at 6 a.m. fine tuning the lyric for, like, there was a song on this album that didn't make it. And I bet you I went through 40 different versions of lyrics, not minor changes, significant changes. And at that point, you're like, I'm doing something wrong because I'm trying to make it perfect. And I mean, I don't know who said it, but it's like no art is ever completed. It's just abandoned. So,
yeah, or what is it? I think was it Da Vinci that it was about stone carving? Said it like it just stopped in nice places or something.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's very good.
That you're never finished. Yeah, I mean, is there anything about the album that we haven't gotten into as far as lyrics? I mean, you've got to just kind of walk through every song lyric by lyric seems like maybe not a fair thing to ask the artist in an interview, but like, are there places that you want to talk about that the songs are all very different, but they hang together. I'm glad that somebody's still making albums, as a project.
Thank you. I think that I mean, there's a lyric in Heart Decides where it says where it's something about so and so was in love with so and so, and so on. Like A was in love with B, and B was in love with C, but C was in love with himself, and that was the sentiment that launched that whole thing. And it was just about these three people in Australia when I lived down in Sydney for 10 years. And so then I took that sentiment, and just that one sentiment was just the piece of sand in the oyster. And I just let it, what is it? Gestulate over time. I just let it become what it needed to become. And then I tried to tie it in. I do a lot of object writing, like journaling just about a sentiment, just to find out where I stand, what it is about that sentiment that rings my bell. But that, stuff like that, it's interesting how you put an album in chronological order, because you're really getting to know someone in a certain order. And in that way, I wish I wouldn't have put the first song first, like let somebody in first. I wish I would have, like with that song, I initially wrote that song like Glad Girls from God Above Voices Isolation Drills. It was like instead of let somebody in, it was like everyone gets in. And it was like a club where everyone it keeps, like the club expands, and there was the bouncers were like everyone gets in. It was like probably about belonging. But then I was like, I don't know. But I wanted it to be between that, and then between that and John Prine's Way Down off. It's off the White album with the drawing on it, the white. And anyway, but yeah, Grown Man. I was shaving one day, and that actually happened, that I made a joke that I thought was subtle. He said modestly, and my wife laughed. And I thought I said I could never be married to someone stupid. And she was like, it's not easy. So I'm trying to draw from this stuff. I wish I wouldn't I chickened out. I didn't say stupid. I said foolish. And I thought stupid lands with such a thud, but I wish I would have said that. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think when the ball gets rolling, the regrets from the last album become the next album, and then there's sort of when you're really in touch with an artistic project. I mean, one of the through lines I see with creatives is that you're never happy, but you're never unhappy because you're working on it. But also the thing that you're doing right now, you don't really care about because it's done, and the faults with it or the thing it failed to say right become the next thing, and there's this momentum to it. It's like the piston in the train engine, that's kind of always going backwards and forwards, but you're never quite done for that process.
And that's why I love, every time I go to dinner, I try and take a photo of everyone that was there. And it's like, it's not going to be a perfect photo. Like someone's always going to be unhappy about, how they looked in it, but that's a song. You're just capturing something in time. It's not definitive. That I think a lot of people go, oh, not a lot of people. I think that I used to think one song is going to define this one subject, and it doesn't. It describes an aspect of a subject, but no 1 4-minute, 6-minute song is going to encapsulate exactly how you feel about one subject. Like My Hometown is a great example of like Bruce Springsteen, phenomenal song, great through line, but he's talking about his hometown. I mean, he touches on the fact that he was sitting on his dad's lap, but that doesn't spell out what his relationship was like with his dad. His mom's not mentioned. His siblings aren't. It's just his relationship to his hometown. And it seems like it encapsulates his life, but it just encapsulates very thoroughly one aspect of his life. And he can go away and write another version of like what it was like to be on the, playing second base in his hometown. And that just fleshes out the photo, the background.
And do you, when you, do you have anything like, cause you also work, you have another job too. Like you work, when we were emailing, you said you got another stuff. Do you have anything about the work-life balance of it? Cause I think all the singer-songwriters, or all the musicians that I see kind of struggle with that they make, like at what point do I, can I quit my job? Or I guess I'll never really be able to quit my job because I'm saying the thing I want to say, and it's gotten successful, but there's a limit on how many people are going to get that without me watering it down. I mean, that process of being somebody who, is a professional musician and also a professional something else. Anything interesting to you there? Or is that all just kind of the boring, not fun part?
I think that it's good to have a job, because I think that to write songs, you need to go away and not think about songs. And I think the balance is, if you're, what was it that I think my wife was telling me, that there's a sweet spot of how much money you can make before your job owns you. And I think it was like maybe between like 110 to 175, which is, a stratosphere that I doubt I'll be flirting with. But it's one of those, if you can find a job and do that, it's important to wake up and listen to listen to music in the morning on the way to something that you don't want to do, because there's this duality of things where you're driving and you're not fully concentrated on the song. And so you're just absorbing it, in the background while you're turning on your, turn signal and whatnot. And you also have less pressure. I mean, I would go to lunch by myself a lot and just do writing in a place that I normally wouldn't be. I'd be in San Antonio. And so I think it's good. I certainly didn't feel that, years ago, when I felt so frustrated with my own creativity and music. But then there's that middle ground where if you can be smart about what you do, where like I worked in construction, and that my heart it wasn't required to have my heart in it. And that left a lot of free time where I wasn't mentally taxed when I came home, where I could write. And then you get to the point where you need to play shows. You need to be in front of people, because that is its own. Just because you can write songs doesn't mean you're good at performing songs, even if you wrote them. Like you hear people do phenomenal. I mean, Jeff Buckley did a phenomenal cover of Hallelujah. And that's where songs take on a new form, when you can play them live in front of people and you get past the nerves. And I mean, Coltrane's always used to say I practice 8 hours a week, 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, 6 hours a week, so that when I'm playing, I'm not thinking. It's second nature. And it does help to get into different rooms, different cities, because then you go, I have gone out of my way. I'm not with my family. And I certainly work hard to have that balance. I mean, I don't play a lot of shows because my wife is my priority, but it is vitally important to play shows and to get out of your comfort zones and to remind yourself that it's a discipline. And if you're going to go and drive 3 hours to play a show, you believe in what you're saying and you believe that it's worth someone's time. And so it's just, you're in different stages, and just enjoy the stage that you're in.
Well, that's beautiful. That's probably a great place to leave it. I want to be respectful of your time and not go too far over anything. That we'll definitely link to your SoundCloud and your website in the show notes. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about or encourage people to look up?
No, I think it's nice. The only thing I'd say is, because this is about like therapy, like the premise of your podcast.
Well, it
phenomenal.
kind of becomes the psychology of, weird stuff, which is sort of I just didn't have it in my, I had no ability to have a podcast where once a week I was like, here's the 10 mindfulness tips to, we're talking about art and design and, peeling the meat off your soul and talking directly to God and all of the, strange mystical things out there. So that's kind of our niche.
It's funny that you can get to something directly in an indirect way. Like I'm editing my own podcast that I'm about to be coming out with, called Talking Singles, Drinking Doubles, where it's you're talking about a single piece of art, whether it be a single song or a single painting or even a single approach, as a window into how one individual piece of art works. And so that's why it meant a lot, Joel, when you said like you like the songs, but they're all different, because the album's out now on Spotify, but I'm going to be still releasing the songs individually with their own artwork, because I want people to see each individual piece stand alone, so that you go, if you walked in and you heard this song, would you go, that's my guy? Because that's how lines stand. And so I think it's cool the way that you do it, because it lets it take its own shape, but the conversation, but it's just the importance of saying what you want to say in one thing, and how that drills down to therapy or acceptance.
Yeah. Did you, was there anything in your history with therapy that was kind of interesting to you, or even as a question, or an open-ended, just as a conversation? Because I think, a part of my project with this and probably with Taproot is to kind of reclaim psychology as this part of life and art and growth and design. And yes, we do state-of-the-art trauma treatment. We do a lot of things that you cannot get anywhere else in the state of Alabama, but that you don't have to be a wounded, hurt puppy to go to therapy. It's not like, oh, there's something wrong with you, come here, and I want, even, there's nothing wrong with you if you're traumatized, and kind of letting us see the humanity. Maybe I can't get rid of the liberal arts education, but in music and psychology and the artists that are and architects and all of that stuff. And I think when you lose that, there's a problem. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. My friend Sally, her mom has been in therapy her whole life. And then Sally goes, I just feel like going for a tune-up, like a 3 or 4 months just to work through things. And that's how I would view it. Like financially, if we got more on our feet, I'd like to. When we went into imago therapy, it was good because you have another person keeping you honest. And it's so interesting if you feel you're open to hearing hard truths about yourself, boy, that accelerates your growth, because then you're going, this person, you're perceiving it this way, but that's not the way it was. And I mean, I'm so fortunate because my wife is such an objective and positive influence and thinker on my life, and very leads with her heart and cares. And so, I think that I think that having a clear mind, I think it opened my eyes, where when you go to therapy, you don't come out necessarily happy. You come out with a clearer mind, and your expectations on life are a lot more realistic. And it doesn't mean that the things
grief.
that triggered
the growth is grief. You're really accepting
Yep.
something that you wish was not there, but it is there. And your emotional reactions to it are not helping you make it disappear, because it's life. And somebody who says, hey, this is not going to go away, but you can become bigger than that, is something that too much therapy has steered away from doing. And it made people dependent on the therapists, and it made therapy more simplistic and mechanistic than it should be, I think.
Yeah. And even if therapy just sets you 50% more free, how, like, when do you think would be the right time to get that 50% back?
Yeah.
So
you're in Austin right now, is that right?
Yeah.
Emotional transformation therapy, that's like one of the only places that you can get it consistently, ETT. And then brain spotting is also another one that we do. But they sound cranky as hell. Like, I wouldn't have believed any of it if I hadn't done it. And then, now, like, I'm so fascinated by the science, just because it took months for me to just be like, all right, this thing works. This is 100% replicatable. But why? But they're both using visual stimuli to kind of skip the front and largely the middle of the brain. I mean, you're going through all these emotional reactions that you don't even have to know what they are. And if anything comes back, it usually is kind of later. It more is a felt thing, and then the memory comes back later. But artists
like an
and creatives,
aftershock.
they're both different. ETT uses three things, like really specific. There's these machines that make really specific color and light blink rate frequencies, and then the direction of the light on the pupil to do something to the occipital. And then brain spotting uses eye position. Like, you have a pointer, and it's just finding a spot where the therapist sees a bizarre pupil dilation that reflects that there's some parasympathetic and sympathetic activation of the nervous system. But basically what both of them do is they're finding a place where your parasympathetic, primitive parasympathetic, and sympathetic nervous system are trying to handle the same emotion in two different paradoxical ways. So you can't go through the emotion, and you're kind of stuck, and you're popping that, which releases a lot of somatic and kind of icky emotional energy. And then 2-3 days later, a lot of time, if you're going to remember what the thing is, it pops up. I mean, for me, I was like, I just felt so vulnerable and kind of angry for like 2 days. And then when I was just done and didn't care anymore, that's when I remembered the stuff that had happened to me, and was like, oh yeah, like, that's really messed up. Like, I would have been really upset if you told me that happened and I remembered it. But I've already felt that for 2 days. That's just a picture that went with it. I'm done. But
yeah.
If you're ever passing through, you should stop by. You can try them. That's one of the things too. We're excited, the podcast studio, because if you want to do some serious long-term work, finding a therapist is a good thing, but they're so fast, like, I can show you a spot and what it feels like in just 5 minutes. A lot of times it spikes creativity and stuff. And so, artists will have these kind of periods afterwards, but you may want to look up somebody who does that if you're interested. It's a weird world. It's not the same stuff that was around in the 90s.
Really? Yeah. I don't know if you've ever I read an interview with David Lynch, and he went to therapy, and he goes, the first session, he goes, will this at all impact? I mean, that's how David Lynch talks. Will this at all impact my creativity? And the therapist goes, it could. And he goes, then I have to go. I was like, oh. I think I think therapy can impact your creativity in a phenomenal way. It broadens the colors you can paint with.
Well, I think it's like a dated perception of the 80s and 90s that the artist has to be super tortured genius, and that when you take away the pain, then the art goes away. Like, that that is kind of a psychoanalytic or neo-Freudian psychoanalytic concept that isn't really true. That talking about the pain for a super long time, all of a sudden, you no longer have anything to say isn't it. It's that you're being able to tell, and you feel it a lot faster. Because brain spotting, I did hypnosis and existential therapy, and kind of then got more into a Jungian leaning thing for years. And the same process happens in therapy. It just speeds it up so fast, where you feel something that you felt like I could never go back there emotionally because it would kill me. That thing overwhelms you. You learn that you can hold it. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, I can do all this other stuff. I'm just allowed to do that. But it's like a week, instead of months of getting somebody there. And I think the newer thing is not, oh, the artist is tortured and sad. When you take the pain of childhood away, then I don't want to sing anymore. It's that I'm learning to tell the difference between my intuition and my intuition and creativity and my trauma reaction, the need to neurotically do something or pretentiously do it, or to control how I'm seen, it being separated from what I actually want to say. That's what I felt in my fiction and nonfiction writing.
Yeah. I'd like to send me your stuff, because I'd love to check it out. It's when you have weird. Nothing to hide. Yeah, therapy helped me just go, what have I got to hide? I'm not like the only imperfect person on earth. Mm-hmm. So when you fly your freak flag, people go, hey, and they walk, the right people walk towards it, and the crazy people.
Yeah, you do start to connect with people that you wouldn't have found otherwise. There is almost something resonant about it or something like that. But we'll point everybody to your website. And do you have any shows coming up? Do you have any and is there a place that you prefer people to buy an album that is better for the artist than just streaming it on YouTube or something?
Yeah, Bandcamp is the best, particularly Bandcamp Fridays, because it 100% goes to the artist. But also just on my website, jeffreysiler.com, we've got the merch page, and that helps out a lot. So you actually have no idea how much it helps. And because I had to press physical copies of a CD for record, like for radio, so sometimes people like to have the relic to kind of feel the feels.
The radio stations still make you mail them a physical CD for the optimal fidelity on the radio.
Well, yeah, and when you're unknown, I'm sure with more established artists, they can just get the link, but you're really vying for attention when you're unknown.
Well, Austin's a good place to be. It seems like there's a lot of good music and art coming out of there. So we'll definitely link to all of that. I'll link to the Bandcamp. If you want to buy it on a Friday. And then we will, or is it every Friday, or is it like a special Friday that they do it?
I don't know. Honestly, any day of the week, if they're so inclined, don't wait.
Sure. Okay.
Enjoy as much as you can. And if you don't have the money, that's fine. Spotify's fine. But yeah, it's like the listening is very generous.
Yeah, and do you plan to tour and promote it, or is there a place people can check and get updates, other than your website for something like that? Get on a mailing list?
Yeah, just Instagram. Yeah, that's the most helpful thing, to join the mailing list, and you can do that on my site. And then if you want to see live dates, like I'm playing June 2nd at the Far Out Lounge, and June 21st at Captain Quack's, both here in Austin.
Okay. Well, yeah, so that sounds great, and I will use your music to play you in and play you out with this if YouTube doesn't take it down, and tell me that I have to upload proof of ownership.
Back in Atlanta when I lived with Tom, we had a U-Haul loft down on a West 12. Rooms divided by sheets, impossible to heat. Man or instrument would play upstairs, and we had all you could need. Ooh. That was the year I swore off girls, and let me assure you, as a group they didn't even shrug. Then despite alarm bells, I fell headlong from Michelle, but her heart belonged to what's-his-face, who was in time I got to California, had a self-help section of my bookshelf between the mirrors. But upon inspection, while they glowed in their reflection, not even a page was dog-eared. Which of course is when you find real love, the perfect excuse to put everything else on hold. The irony, they say, is we could have been healing each other's pain, but wasted those first 10 years pulling and pushing away. Ain't that the way? It all made sense at the time. You fight it, feed it, pretend not to need it. No matter how hard you try, the heart decides. The heart decides. You know the heart decides. Just last week I got lunch with Tom, and I said sorry for not calling during his divorce. It was all just as well, 'cause I'd been in the same boat myself. We got out by the skin of our teeth, but it took its toll on our health. And if the saying you are what you eat applies, feast your eyes on a slice of human humble pie. I've had highs and lows and fallouts with friends, always feeling on the outside looking in. I've learned how to give, I'm learning how to